Good morning, Facebook. This is Will Briganti reporting live from Nasdaq's global headquarters in Lower Manhattan. Thank you so much for joining us for today's Nasdaq Advisory Live, brought to you by Nasdaq Corporate Solutions. Joining me today is Masood Ghaussi, an investor relations advisory services analyst with Nasdaq Corporate Solutions. Masood, thanks so much for joining me today. Any developments since we were back last year, Thursday on the snow day?
So 5 things I want to touch upon today, Will. 1, the reflation theme is well and alive. 2, Yellen conducted her 2-day congressional testimony. 3, CPI and inflation pressure is up. 4, we're seeing a breakdown of asset correlation. And 5, retail CEOs sat down with the Trump administration to discuss the border tax adjustment and pushing back in a sense that it will hurt their profits.
Great. Let's drill a little bit deeper into some of those issues. What exactly is that reflation theme that you just mentioned?
Sure. So reflation is the return of inflation and growth in the markets, predominantly in the U.S. markets and spilling over to global markets on the heels of almost on a daily basis now Donald Trump talking about tax cuts and deregulation. Essentially, we saw $5 trillion of value created in the global equity markets since the November election victory. We're seeing U.S. equity markets rise, global equity markets rise, the dollar rally, gold rallying, bond prices, bonds selling as a result, yields going up, and essentially a lot of optimism baked into the markets.
Great. All right. Thank you so much for that insight. You did mention Federal Reserve Chair Janet Yellen's testimony. What are some of the key takeaways?
Absolutely. So it was a 2-day congressional testimony. A lot was discussed, but in a nutshell, she mentioned that labor market conditions are improving. Inflationary pressures are up, valuations are rising, and also leverage ratios are going up. Finally, she wants to shrink the balance sheet. The markets have responded by rate hike odds going up. So it looks like we're pricing in 3 rate hikes this year, as scheduled. Finally, we saw 3 strong numbers coming out of the Labor Department, Commerce Department, and Fed manufacturing output, and all indicating strong economic growth.
Great, thank you so much. That leads me to the CPI figures that you mentioned. Can you elaborate on that for our viewers today?
Sure, absolutely. So CPI came out, I think it was yesterday, up 0.6% month-to-month basis. On a year-on-year basis, it's up 2.5%. Last we saw these levels was back 4 or 5 years ago. So again, ties into the whole theme of inflationary pressure picking up and tying into the Federal Reserve looking to raise interest rates.
Great.
And also, I'm sorry, tying back into the whole reflation theme.
Sure, of course. Any other trends on that inflationary theme that you just mentioned that we should be paying attention to?
Yeah, so some interesting studies coming out from Bloomberg and also Wall Street Journal. Most of them obviously quoting research analysts. We're seeing iShares TIPS bond ETF. TIPS is Treasury Inflation Protected Securities. It's the largest exchange traded fund. We're seeing a lot of inflows, essentially implying that investors are pricing in inflation. We're also seeing the S&P 500 index continue to climb, and the PE, forward-looking PE at in and around 17.5 times. This is about 25% above its 10-year historical average. Volatility traders seem to be frustrated. We're seeing a lot of outflows from exchange-traded volatility indexes. And finally, we're continuing to see gold rally.
Great. Final question. Going into next week, anything our viewers on Facebook should be paying attention to?
We're still in the thick of earnings. Expect another 1 or 2 weeks of earnings. Again, solid earnings growth, depending on how you measure it, in and around 5.7%, coming off of a earnings recession. And finally, policies obviously coming out from Washington, as mentioned early on, tax cuts and deregulation.
Great. Thank you so much, Masood. I appreciate your insight
Thank you,
today.
Will.
Thank you for joining me. Thanks to all of our viewers on Facebook for joining us on Nasdaq Advisory Live, and a quick shout out to all of our Nasdaq IR Insight customers who joined us on today's broadcast. We look forward to seeing you back here next week when we're going to drill into detail on the 13F filings that came out this week. Thanks so much. Have a great weekend.